Give me a few moments. So I'm just checking my mobile to see if we are live and if the audio is good. So give me a few moments, guys. So I think we are live. Welcome everyone. This is Tech Primers. So in this video, we are going to see what is Hibernate, and we are going to see how we can use Hibernate using the Spring Data JPA, and how it works well with the Spring Boot application. So if you see here, this is the Spring initializer. What we are going to do is the Spring initializer is we are going to create a Spring Boot application. So right now the Spring Boot version is 1.5.3. We're going to create a Spring Boot application with the package com tech primers, I will say JPA, and I'm going to create an application name as Spring JPA Hibernate example. So this particular project, whatever I'm creating, I'll push that to GitHub repository, so you can get that directly from the GitHub repository once this live stream is completed. So the dependencies which we are going to add is the web. So what we are going to do is we are going to expose a REST endpoint from the Spring Boot application, so that you can access it from the browser, and then you can see how the database queries are working and stuff like that. The next one would be the JPA in itself. So I'm going to use the Java Persistent API. If you see here, this by default includes the Spring Data JPA, Spring ORM, and the Hibernate. So this is going to bring us Hibernate, and we're going to see how we are going to use the Hibernate with that. Also, I'm going to use the MySql database. So I need a MySql driver. So I'm going to add that dependency. So that is also available in the Spring initializer here. So I'm just going to add that. I'm just creating a project out of it here. So I'm just hitting the generate project. So meanwhile, if you have any queries or concerns or anything which you want to know, you can post the comments. So I'll be checking the video from my mobile as well, so I can give you or post you the comments or the updates parallelly. So if you have any questions or something, don't hesitate to ask it right now. So the project got generated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unzip this guy. So before we get into the implementation, right? So if you're not aware about what is JPA, so JPA is the Java Persistence API. So Java has come up with a specification saying these are the things which you should be using for creating a Java Persistent API. So they have just given annotations and stuff so that you can use it in your application, or you can implement it based on that particular specification. So Spring JPA and Hibernate are the implementation. So Hibernate is an implementation of the JPA. So Spring also has a Spring Data JPA, which is another implementation. So I've unzipped the project. Let me meanwhile open it and I'll explain what is Hibernate. Okay, so meanwhile it is opening. So as I said earlier, right? So the JPA is a Java Persistent API. It is a specification created by Java for developers, so that people can create and implement based on those specifications for persisting any objects into the database using Java objects directly. So how do we right now persist the data, right? So we create some query. So if you're using Spring JDBC, or you're using some other JDBC drivers, some other framework to persist into the database, what we do is we create queries. We just create update commands manually, we handcraft that, and then we persist into the database using a driver, right? That's what we do. But what Java specification says that you can use this implementation, you can use these specification to implement your own Java objects, which can be directly persisted into the database. So you don't have to create queries to be persisted into the database. It can be anything. It can be MySQL, it can be H2, it can be Elastic, or it can be any database. So basically MongoDB or NoSQL databases, whichever you like. So what the Java specification says is you can follow that particular specification. Your implementation can change, but your interface will not change. So basically they have a set of interfaces and annotations which we can follow, so that your implementation can be different, but you should follow the same specification, so that every API is almost similar. That is the idea behind Java persistent API. So I have opened the project in IntelliJ here. So if you see here, in the dependencies in the POM, so we have a Spring Boot starter data JPA. So this is one of the dependencies which is going to bring everything for us. So if I go inside this particular dependency POM, you can see that we have Hibernate here, and also the Spring starter JDBC. So it's going to give all the JDBC drivers. Also the Hibernate dependencies are all added here. So all the things which are required for our processing and the implementation, it's all provided by the single dependency. So Spring Data JPA is going to bring up all the Hibernate and the relevant dependencies which we require. So if you had asked me to do a video on Hibernate maybe like 4 years back or something, I would have created Hibernate. You should then I would have created transactional API separately. I would have created Spring separately. Then I would have handcrafted it and done all those things separately. But Spring Boot is now wrapping up everything together, and then you can just, if you see here, I'm just adding one dependency. It's going to bring everything for me. So that is what is Spring Boot is helping us. And also while implementing, you will know how simple it is to create a Hibernate project or Hibernate implementation or a model currently with Spring Boot compared to how we used to do it earlier. Okay, the next dependency would be the web. So as I said earlier, we are going to expose a REST endpoint from this particular application. So that's why we have added the Spring Starter Web. The next one would be the MySQL connector. So we wanted to connect to the MySQL database. So I have a MySQL database running in my machine here. So I'm using, basically, if you are not aware of what I'm using MacBook Pro. So I have a MySQL version running here locally. So, and I have a UI SQL Pro. So if you see here, I have a database called users. I have a database called test, and I have a table name called users with different values and different uh, columns and attributes. So what we are going to do is we are going to retrieve data, we can update data. So that is what we are going to see in this particular example. Okay, so let's go ahead and start implementing the classes. So if you see here, this is the default implementation or the default package which Spring Boot creates basically. So I have a, I don't know why this particular package name is so weird, it's so big. Can I create one? Let it be there. So what we can do is I'll create a new package for our resource. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a resource. So this is going to be the REST endpoint which we are going to expose. So let's create it as user resource. So since I have the database table as users, so I'll create a user resource. So I'm going to use Spring MVC. So as address controller, I'm adding to expose this particular resource as a controller, which is going to be a REST controller, and I need to map it to a REST endpoint. So I need to say REST slash users slash users. I'll make it users. Okay, and I'm going to add a REST endpoint to retrieve the users. Okay, I will create a photo called users get all. So what we need is a list of users. Okay, so I'm going to say list of users, and then we need to, so let's create these users here, right? So I'm going to say create class. So let's create a package called model. I'll just put this into the user. So I'll not touch this class for now. So let's come to that later. I'll import the list here. The next one, what we need is the repository. So what we need to do is we need to create a repository for this particular model. So for the database, I'm going to create a users repository. Okay. So why do we need a repository? So Spring JPA enforces us to create a repository for connecting to any particular data model. So this is going to be an interface. We need to extend the JPA interface. So JPA repository is the interface. If you see here, this is coming out of Spring Data JPA. So this is going to help us in persisting and retrieving data from the database using the model. So the model which I'm going to use is integer users. The primary key would be integer because we have ID right in the table. So this is going to be integer. So first one will be the model, and then that second one will be integer. So if you're not aware about what is Spring Data JPA, you can check out my other videos. I have done a separate video on what is Spring Data JPA and how you can use it. But yeah, for relevance, if you want to go back and check that out, you can go and check it out. I'll leave a card in the above, so you will get a notification. You can just go to that particular video and check it out if you're not aware. Okay, so I have created the users repository. So then what am I going to do? So I'm going to say return users repository dot find all. So the repository by default gives some functions which we frequently use. For example, find all is one type of function where you get all the data from the database from that particular table. Okay, so I'm going to say find all from the repository for the get all method. So I need to expose this as a rest endpoint, right? I'll say all. Okay, so rest slash user slash all is going to return me all the data. Okay, so now we have created the repository, we have created the model, but we didn't do anything inside the model. Let's go to the model. So here we are going to use the Java persistent API annotations. So there is something called entity. So if you see here, the annotation says Java X persistent. So this is going to be the Java specification API. If you see here, there is one which is deprecated, or org Hibernate annotation. So Hibernate previously had it separately, but now that is taken out and then put inside Java API, the Java specification API. That is why we are going to use only the Java X persistence. So you don't have to rely on Hibernate. You can take Hibernate and use anything else later. Okay, and also I'm going to say that I'm going to expose this particular users model as a table. So I'm just saying that, okay, this I need as a table, and I want the table name to be called users. And for simplicity, we need to connect to the database, right? So we can use catalog and say test. So that is going to connect to that particular database. Okay, so in this case we are using MySql, so it will connect to that. So the next one would be the ID. So integer, I'm going to create ID. Then what is that? There should be a name, and there is a salary. I don't know if it is long or integer. Let me check in the database. And then finally, I need the team name. Let's check if the fields are right. So we have ID, name, salary, and team name. So I don't think salary is. Let's check the structure of the table. So salary is also integer. So I'm not going to use long. So let's use integer. So what we can do here is we need a unique identifier. So we are going to stamp ID as the unique identifier. So if you see here, all these are Java persistent APIs. Entity, ID, table, all these are Java persistent annotations. Okay. Also, if you want to add specifically a column, you can just say column. You can mark this as a column, and then you can type what type of name it will be. So I'm just going to say you can just do ID here. So if you don't mention anything, it will automatically use the same name. So if you, I don't need to add ID here as a column with an add column annotation. It will by default get it, but just for the day, say for the usage, I'm just showing it here. So you can do this. You can just say add column, and then say name and use name. So you don't have to do this explicitly, but yeah, that's how you can do that. So I'm going to create some getters and setters so that we can use it later. The model also, we need to create a empty constructor. So that is how Hibernate expects it to be done. So we have to mandatorily create that. let's not go into that, but yeah, you have to create that. Okay, so our entity is done, so our model is done, our repository is done. So what else is pending? So we need to now provide Spring Boot a way to identify that okay, this particular project has the JPA repository used. So what we are going to do that for that is we are going to create a configuration file. So if you are not familiar with the Java configurations in Spring Boot, so we are not going to create XMLs in Spring Boot. We are going to create config files basically. So you just add configuration file. This will be treated as a config. Okay. So if there are anything, you can add it here. Actually, in our case, it's only the enable JPA annotation. So, and in fact, you don't even have to do this in a specific Java configuration file. Okay, let me delete this particular folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add it into the Spring JPA here itself. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to provide the packages where the repository file resides. So in our case, what is the package for this guy? So I'm going to give this package so that during the initialization stage, Spring Boot scans all the packages which are mentioned here, and it knows that okay, there is a repository is residing there, and then it will load and create whatever it needs to do for us to serve. Okay, I think that is it. The main part would be the application property files. So the properties basically. So I have already created some properties which we require. So let's copy that from here. So everyone likes properties, right? So it's like that's a way to control your code, isn't it? Yeah, so Spring also has come up with some properties. So if you see here, spring.datasource.url, so that is where we are going to give the JDBC connection URL. So in my case, I'm using the local host, and the port number is 3306, and the database is test. Username and password I don't have any, so that is why it is empty. So these are some defined predefined properties which you can set. So test while and idle, and then I'm just giving a validation query so that when my process comes up, this validates whether the connection is there or not. And then I'm just saying show the SQL just for our usage sake. The final one is the Hibernate. So you can control Hibernate to create, update or drop the tables automatically from the database. So I'm going to just say update. So I'm not going to say create. So if the table is not there and if the entities are there, it'll go ahead and create it. If you say create and drop, it will drop and recreate every time you restart your process. So I'm not going to take any risks. So I'm just saying update. Okay. So next one would be the naming strategy. So how you name your query. So that is this naming strategy. If you have your own custom implementation, or if you want to override this naming strategy, which Hibernate is providing, you can go ahead and do that. So that is where you override it here. So for example, here we are overriding the Spring JPA thing to here. Okay, so whatever Hibernate provides. The final one will be the dialect. So if you are using Sybase database, you can use Sybase dialect. Here we are using a MySql dialect, so I'm using a MySql dialect. So there are different dialects which you can override. So dialects are basically commands which are different from different databases. You can override the specific dialect so that the framework takes care of creating that corresponding queries automatically based on this dialect. Okay, so that is dialect. So I think that's it. We have added almost everything. Hopefully the process comes up on the first go. So that's what we do, right? We always write code and then we pray that it should be fine. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do as well. So let me start this particular program, this process basically. So I'm just started the Spring Boot application. So what, as you know, Spring Boot application is going to have a embedded Tomcat, and it's going to bring this particular process as a REST endpoint in itself. So since I didn't override any port, it is going to bring the process in the 8080 port, or else if you want to override the port, you can add a property for that as well. Server port. Okay. So the Spring Boot application is coming up. If you notice here, the Hibernate version which it uses is 5.0.12 final. So internally, if you see here, we didn't add anything much in the pom.xml. We just added a single dependency called Spring Boot starter data JPA, and it automatically brought us the Hibernate and other dependencies which we require. Okay. Okay, we are lucky. If you see here, the REST endpoints which are mapped are all REST/user/all, which we created, and our server is up right now. So Tomcat is listening to 8080 port. Let's test that now. Let me go to the REST URL. I'm going to say 8080/REST/user/all. So this particular URL is going to return me all the data which is there in the database, but we are getting an exception here. Let's check what is the exception. What did we do incorrectly? Okay, so if you see here, yeah, we are getting a null pointer exception on the users repository. Basically, we didn't even auto wire it. We can do an auto wire. Okay, or I can add a constructor. So if you see here, I'm using Spring 5, right? So Spring MVC 5, so 4 plus basically. So you can auto wire. You don't have to auto wire it. If you add it as a constructor argument or constructor dependency injection, Spring by default injects it. So you don't have to have a auto wire annotation basically. So but just for simplicity, I've added the add auto wire implementation here, annotation here, so that we can check now quickly. Okay, so the process is up again. Let's go to the browser and check it. Let's pray again, right? Okay, so the prayer worked. So if you see here, these are the data which is there in the database. So let me go to the database. Yeah, so if you see here, there are 2 Ajays, 1 Mike and 1 Chaka. So this is the team name and this is the salary detail, and I can see the same in the response which we got. So as you see, so what we did here is, we created a REST endpoint. We used a users repository. We created a JPA repository using the Spring Data JPA. Okay, we have implemented, we have extended the JPA repository interface, and we said that okay, I want to have users to control this repository. So users is nothing but a model, which is nothing but an entity, which is a Java API, JavaX persistent entity, and the table name is users. The database is test, and these are my columns, and the ID is nothing but the unique index on this particular table, and these are my columns. So that is how we got it. That is what we are defining here. And using the repository, we are doing a find all to fetch all the data, okay, from the table. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show how to fetch the specific information from the database. So let's see. I need a what do I need? So I need to get my name. So we had 2 Ajays, right? So let's do that. So there could be multiple people with the same name, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get 2 different data. So get user. Okay, I'm going to return a list of people. Okay, so what we need to do is you need to do a user repository dot. So in this case, we need to get by some specific field, right? So we need to write that particular method. So we need to create that particular method. So I'm going to say find by name. Okay, and I need to pass the name. So name, I'm going to get it from here. Okay, so path variable. So I'm going to say path variable. I have a path variable called name, right? Okay, so let me go inside path variable. Yeah, I'm going to say that, give that for name. Okay, so it's going to get the name from here and then inject into the variable name here. So into the repository, we need to create now the method. So I'm just saying create. It is just going to create. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this guy into an optional, so that so if you're not aware about optional is a type of wrapper introduced in Java 8, which is useful for having type null safe checks. So if let's say you find by a particular name and you did not get any response from the database, it will by default return null. Okay, so it is ugly, right? So we don't want to display null, so we don't want to handle null checks everywhere. So that is why optional is helping us. So I'm just going to wrap it around optional, and in the resource, what I'm going to do is, so I'll show you how to use the optional. So I'm going to say users list optional. Okay, let's use list optional. So let's move this guy to the left. Okay, so with the list optional, you can do different things. You can do map, you can do filter, you can do whatever you want here. You can do flat map, you can do anything. So in this case, what we are going to do is we want to return the data if it is present, right? So what we are going to do is if it is present, then we are going to do something, or we can use this. There is something called is present. You can do a if check, and if you want, you can do that as well. So in our case, we are going to say dot. I'm just seeing which is a better way. I do if present. If present is a terminal operation, but I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to override something called or else and get. So if you see here, if the value is present, then it will be returning. For example, if you see, I'm going to say that or else return something. So I'm just going to say return me a new list, so that we don't get null pointer exception. So this will be like typically a list of users. If you see here, this is going to be a list of users. So you can either do this, or what you can do is you can do this. List optional dot is present. So if inside if what I'm doing is you can do list optional dot get. So if it is present, then only you should use get, or else it will throw an warning. IntelliJ will throw a warning. So for example, if I say list optional dot get, if you see here, there is a warning here. Optional dot get without its present check. So which is like a unsafe check. So optional is just like a wrapper around or any object, and you can use it in a easier way for type safety. So here what we are doing is if it is there, if the value is there in the optional, it will be returned, or else it will give a empty list. So we can try that, or we can do this way as well. So as I said, you can do a get here. This will be nothing but some users list, and you can return this here or something like that. You can play around here either with this option or that this option. I feel this is better. Or let's say if you want to throw an exception, okay, you can just say or else throw. So you basically can throw a new runtime exception saying no users found. Okay, we can do that as well. Okay, let's try both. So first I'll show you guys this option. So what we are going to do is we are going to return empty array list if nothing is found. Okay, let's run this. Hopefully we don't have to pray this time. Let's see. You never know, right? You never know about coding. Okay, the application is up now. So let's go to our endpoint. So all is going to return everything. So we need Ajay, right? So let's type Ajay. Okay, so we got only 2 records. So that means it's working. So let's try something new, right? Why is it? Okay, we're cribbing now. Let's go localhost 8080 // user / new. So this is not there. So if you see here right now, we are getting a empty array list. So this is doing a trick. The optional is doing a trick. Let's say we want to play around, and we say that okay, if there is nothing, I'll just say I'll throw the exception. Let that guy handle. Okay, let the UI handle, or let whoever is calling me, let them handle it. So let me restart this guy. Okay, the application has come up. Let's go to our users. Let's check once again. Ajay. Yeah, we got 2 records, which is fine, which is right. So now I'm going to give a new user list. I don't know why it's still coming as empty list. It should have thrown an error, but I think user repository is coming with the value. That's what I could think of. Yeah. Basically, I think users repository is giving a empty response instead of the null response. We can try that out actually. So what we can do is we can do a return, and I'll just comment out or delete this code. Okay, Just remove optional, because when I tried at work I use the Spring Data JPA, so sometimes it returns null value, so it is very annoying. But I think maybe that could be specific, because that could be specific for a different REST endpoint with different. But yeah, let's check it out. Yeah, let's confirm our doubts, right? Which is good. Okay, it's up. Let me. Yeah, it's coming from the Spring Data JPA itself. So that is returning a new. We can do one more thing. We can write one more method to do that, where to do something else, right? So let's say we want to query by ID. Okay, I want to query by ID. So in this case, it will be only single user, right? So because the ID is user. Okay, so I'm going to say path variable. My variable name is ID. I am going to say integer ID. Okay. Now I'm going to say return users repository dot find by ID. Okay. You can even do. There is also a method called find one. So if you see here, find one and find by ID are same, because our ID or the primary ID in our case is the ID field. So if you see here, find one is also going to return the same thing. So I will try using the find one itself. Okay. We don't have to rewrite the method, right? So I'll show you the difference between find one and find by when we use optional. So now let's see what happens. Okay, I didn't give the slash here. Okay. So let's see what happens here when we give a ID which doesn't even exist. So let's see what happens. Okay, the server is up. Let me refresh. See, you get a error here. Okay, ambiguous. What is this? Users. Okay, users new. I don't know why it's okay. We should have used users slash the ID, right? I should have used ID. I should have used one. Why is it failing now? Okay. Okay, I need to use a different REST endpoint because these servers are having the same. Okay, I'll use I'll say user slash ID slash whatever. Okay, this later we can change it as name. So I'll just use an ID so that we don't mess it up with the other people. Okay, so the application is up. So I'm going to say ID slash one. So this is going to return me the first one. So now I'm going to say 100, which is doesn't even exist. Okay, it's returning empty. Or is it throwing any exception? Let's check if it is throwing any exception. I don't think it throws an exception, looks like. Network. Yeah, status is 200. I don't know why it doesn't show, but yeah, it's not throwing any exception. Maybe basically it's just returning an empty response. But yeah, you can see the query. If you see, we had enabled the show SQL as true, right? If you see here, see the queries are getting printed from Hibernate. So you can see what query goes to the database literally. So if you see here, whatever query we ran, it's literally doing a where clause. So we didn't even type anything. So it's automatically taken care by the Spring JPA and Hibernate. So basically it's coming up from here. So based on this, it generates everything. Okay. So that is for retrieving specific record and specific. So let's do one updation. Okay. So for simplicity, I'll use get itself. I'll say update slash name. Okay. Let's update a name. I'm going to say update and I'm going to give only the name so that it's going to update the name. And also for updating that name, we need to give an ID, right? So we need to give the ID of the person who needs to be updated. Okay. So with that, we'll complete it. So I'll not take more time. So ID integer ID, and I'll say path variable name. name. Okay, the string. I'll just close this. Now what we need to do is in the repository we already have update, or we have insert. If you want to insert, you can use insert, but we can use save here for our case. So there are save and flush. If you see, save is what we are going to use. So before that, what we are going to do is we need to when we need to save, you need to provide the model basically. So if you see here, you need to provide the users basically. So but we don't know the users, right? We have to get it first. So what we are going to do is we are going to do a find by. So we are going to use the same thing whatever we're doing here, or we can even call that particular guy, right? So for simplicity, I'll just say get id, and I'm going to call that get id. Okay, so what we get is the users. That particular user's detail is there, and now I'm going to do a set of name. So I'm just basically overriding that. Okay, and I'm going to pass that particular users here. So this what is that's going to do is it is going to get the existing user based on the id, and we are going to update the new name into the id, and we are just saving it. Okay, you see here there are different commands: save and flush. Each has their own implementation and the um, usage. So I'm going to use save in this case. So if you want to if you want to save the data, and you want to get the updated data before even committing that transaction, then you can use the save and flush. Basically, you want to if you want to get the dirty data which we changed, then you can use save and flush. But in our case, I'm just having only one data. For simplicity, I'm just going to save it. So I'm just going to use save. Okay, so our rest endpoint also is available here. Update and then id. Okay, so it's up. Let me do an update. So update, our id is 1, right? So I'll update 1 as Ajay 2. Okay, not found. Why? Yeah, there is no id. Yes, so I don't need the id. I just need to do that. Okay, so the updated data came back, and now let's do a rest call with all, right? That's what is going to give us all. So let's check if it really got updated. Yeah, it really got updated. If you see here, Ajay 2 is updated. I still don't believe it. Okay, let's go to the database and check. How do I refresh? I don't know. I can do a query and then see. Basically, stick from users. How do I execute a query? Execute option. Okay. Run current. Okay. So this is I just didn't notice the run current here. Okay, but yeah, if you see here the Ajay 2 got updated, let's for fun let's update it to Ajay 3, right? Okay, let's come here. Okay, Ajay 3 got updated. So that's what we aimed at. So we are using now Hibernate, Spring JPA, and we are using the Java specification to update the data into a MySql database. So this is what you need to do in a Spring Boot application. So you need to create a entity model. So basically, this is the data model. So which we need for. So this is basically like the translator, right? So this is going to be your query. This is going to frame your query. If you see your query, this is what is going to define your query. So you should be very careful in creating this particular model. So you need to be careful in creating this model and use this into the JPA repository which Spring provides. So Spring Data JPA. So I'm using the JPA repository here and using this uses and just plugging it. And you can use different methods from this repository to access the data from the database directly. You see here, I'm just doing a find all, find by name, find one. All these are like database queries. I don't have to handcraft any of these. If you like 4 years ago, I used to use a Spring JDBC template. In fact, 3 years ago, 3 years or 2 years ago, I've been using it. So I'm using Spring Boot for the past 1 year almost. So it is very good in terms of abstracting out all these stuff, so I don't have to write the query manually. So if you know about Spring JDBC template, right, you have to create a transaction, you have to manually handle it, you have to manually create a query, you have to copy the values from the objects and put it inside the objects which you need to push it. All those things were there, and you need to create the query at runtime. All those things were there, and testing is another problem. So here Spring Data is all extracting those boilerplate codes which we need to do, and it's making our life simple. And the Hibernate is adding an advantage with all its existing Java's persistent API implementations. So all these are implemented, all these annotations are all implemented in the Hibernate layer, so it takes care of handling those at that particular layer. Okay, so one additional thing would be the at enable JPA repository, which we need to do, so that Spring Boot knows that okay, it needs to use JPA and the repositories are lying in this particular package. So that is what we have done. And final thing would be the properties. As you know, anywhere any Java code or any Java developer would have spent days in updating properties, right? So yeah, we have to update the properties to make sure our application or the implementation library knows stuff. So that is what we are doing here. We are telling Spring data source that okay, I use this particular data source, these are the username and password, and Spring creates a data source. Using the data source, Hibernate persists the data into the database using transaction. So it is all coming from the dependency of Spring Starter data JPA. Okay, so that is how you use Hibernate in a Spring Boot application using Spring Data JPA and the Java Persistent API. Okay, so if you have any doubts or questions or queries, you can post it in the comments below. If you like the video, you can like it, share it if you feel that okay, people should learn about it. And if you have any queries, you can contact me. If you want me to do a specific video on any specific topic, let me know in the comments below. I'll try to do it to the best of my knowledge. Hope you found this particular video interesting. See you again in the next video. Thank you for listening. See you guys.